Hello, everyone.
Hey there, folks.
This is AV.
This is Rita.
And you're listening to
I Don't Know Her,
the podcast where we talk about women
and some other folks
that you've never heard of.
But today you will.
So we're going to start the show by talking about actually some listener feedback.
Yes.
So I talked about Barbara Hillary 2 episodes ago.
I think so, yeah.
And Barbara was a Black woman who summited both the North Pole and the South Pole. And she did it like in her elder years.
Oh, yeah.
Which was pretty impressive. I mean, not pretty impressive. It's fucking very impressive. And, sometimes when we're talking about these women, it's hard because we've talked about before that whenever people talk about women, especially, and people of color who accomplish great things, it's like they only get to be one thing, which is phenomenal, right? And it leaves out like the parts of them that are human, that make them complicated, that make them, more like us. And we've talked about, and especially when I talked to Mary Cronk Farrell, whose interview we just re-aired because her book came out or is coming out very soon. It's important that young people and really anyone who's reading about somebody who's accomplished something can see that they're allowed to be human, that they're allowed to make mistakes and not be a perfect person. So sometimes when I'm researching, I'm deliberately looking for something that makes somebody a little more complicated, just so that there's not like this one note.
Yeah. I sometimes get a little fearful, like especially when we were recording for the first season, I would like find a little messy part and I'm like, oh, do I want to do this person because they had this complicated issue over here? And I'm not afraid of that anymore.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not afraid of that. But I think that in the quest to make somebody like Barbara Hillary more complicated, and I mean, she already was a pretty complicated person, but it was really hard to find stuff about her. Particularly, like I remember I mentioned that there's like a 20 or 30 year gap where she's just working as a nurse and a nurse educator, and like no one talked about anything that she did.
Anything she accomplished during that time.
Yeah, during that time. It was just a gap. And so everything I had to work from on her was written about her, or it was stuff she directly said. So like I watched a lot of videos of her giving speeches. Like she gave one at the now National Organization for Women Awards and stuff of that nature. And so like I got a pretty good vibe from interviews with her where she was speaking, and also in these speeches that she gave at awards ceremonies and stuff. I got a pretty good vibe of like who she was. And she was definitely like, I would say almost confrontational as a person. And so when I was telling her story, I wanted to talk about those kinds of things that she could definitely be seen as an off-putting person by the way that she talked about them. But in my effort to like try to make her a three-dimensional person, one of our listeners wrote in to tell us that they felt like we had sort of not done her justice as a Black woman.
Yeah, and obviously we're not Black.
Neither of us are.
Yeah, and so I totally understand that point of view is something that we will never be able to conceptualize.
No, not at all. And I want to actually like quote some of the stuff that this person said to us, just because I think it's not fair for me to paraphrase. I want to directly say what she wrote. She said that we showed no empathy for what Barbara must have gone through growing up as a Black woman in the U.S. at that time. The resilience, bootstrapping determination that we Black women are raised with is our parents' effort to prepare us for an unjust world. Your projecting transphobia and other assumptions on her was upsetting. Your criticism of her mother's parenting came from a place of privilege. And including a Black co-host on episodes about Black women going forward could help inform us and our listeners on the women that we profile through the lens of someone with a shared experience. And I think all of that's a very fair criticism.
Absolutely.
And again, I think that sometimes when we're trying to make someone's self and story be complex, it's hard to do that without like incorporating what obviously is seen as a criticism. Mm-hmm. And so I just wanted to address that and say that, you know, it was obviously not intentional, but doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Intent does not equal impact.
Yes. And so going forth, definitely going to keep that into consideration.
Mm-hmm. I think it's really important that that's something we've talked about on the show a lot, that intent does not equal impact. And so, you know, I just want to acknowledge that telling Barbara's story and not taking into consideration that context was not intentionally harmful, but it resulted in harm. Mm-hmm. So we just want to acknowledge that and apologize for it. We just wanted to invite that listener to come on the show as a guest host if she would like to. So I re-extend that invitation to Ish. So if you'd like to, please get back in touch with us. And, you know, we've had plans for so long to have co-hosts who represent the various communities that we want to talk about be on the show. But unfortunately, COVID has made that really difficult.
Yes.
Like we had people lined up and then COVID happened and we couldn't record in person and they didn't have microphones and so on and so forth. So we ended up tabling that. And then now that things are sort of like back to normal, most of those people have sort of fallen off the earth. Like I can't get a hold of them. And then also their lives have just become consumed with other things. So they're like, oh, I don't really have time. So we found ourselves like, okay, well, this plan we had kind of fell apart. I also wanted to acknowledge that, and some listeners might have already noticed this, that sometimes I think this season especially, I haven't been on the top of my game.
Same.
It's, you know, a combination of the thousands of things that have been interrupting our flow with recording, and just in general, like life has just been really hard. And so I think that's when mistakes get made, though. Like we're telling real people's real stories, and there's a responsibility there to get it right.
So back on the game.
Yeah, that's the hope.
Circling back to what Avi said before, always welcoming. If you have any opinion or issue, tell us. We're more than willing to fix it, remedy it, acknowledge it.
Absolutely. Like, I think it's especially important because we can't sit here and preach about doing the work and then not do the work. So,
and we constantly get annoyed when people do not acknowledge their mistakes and need to do the work. So.
Yeah. And, you know, another thing that I want to make sure that is clear is that we're not going to take the episode down and we're not going to edit out those things because that is like trying to erase or hide. But what we are going to do is we're going to attach this part of the conversation onto that episode and re-upload it. So you might see it show up in your podcast shuffle again, and that's why. So if you're hearing this and you're like, wait, I just listened to this episode, that would be why you're seeing it again in your feed.
All right.
With that said, I have a new person.
I know. I'm excited.
Yeah, I shared a photo on my social media just because I
excited.
Could not wait. So the person I'm talking about today is Charmion. Do you know who that is?
Hell no.
So Charmion was a strong woman whose trapeze performance was one of the first to be captured on film.
Charmion, is that like French?
Yeah.
Okay.
It is. So I'm probably saying it wrong. Let's be honest.
I don't know.
Even on my re-release of the Mary Cronk Farrell episode where we interviewed her, because she talked about this photographer whose name in English looks like Catherine Leroy. And I found out during the course of the interview that her name was like Katrine Lavoie.
Oh, wow.
And so even when I was like doing the intro again, so to the re-release, I could not remember how to say the name correctly. I mean, you guys, I'm so sorry. French is the language for me that I cannot get right. I keep trying and I keep failing and I keep doing the people. Like, what is wrong with me? So I'm going to talk about Charmion. So Charmion was born Lavier Cooper. At least I think that's how you say her name. Because actually that first name that she has is spelled exactly the same way as Storme de Lavier's name.
Oh, okay.
So it's Laverie.
Ooh.
And that's how Storme said their name was de Lavier. So I think it's Lavier Cooper, or else it's Lavery.
No.
But she was born in 1875, so there's not a lot of like stuff about how to say her name.
There's no interviews where they're going to be saying her name.
She was born on July 18th, 1875 in Sacramento, California. Not much is really known about her life in general. I would say that I've been wanting to do her as a subject for a very long time. In fact, I had a friend who's an academic get a academic piece that had been written about Charmion because I couldn't get it. And they worked for a university, so they were able to get it for me.
Oh, nice.
And that request that I put in for my friend was from January of 2021.
Oh my gosh.
So that's how long it's
over a
been
year
that I've been wanting to do this person. And part of the reason why I haven't done them is because there just isn't a lot of information. So when I'm talking about her story, I'm actually going to be weaving in a lot of stuff about what was going on historically at the time in the United States. So there isn't much about her childhood. What I do know is that she practiced gymnastics as a teen and a young adult. And I think that's where she probably started to develop her well-known musculature. She's a very muscly person. As early as 1894, when she was around 19, she started performing as a gymnast at Oak Park Pavilion in Sacramento. She really had unusual strength from someone her size. She was only 5'1" and about 130 pounds. So pretty small.
That's pretty petite, yeah.
And she was able to do tricks on the rings that most girls and women were not able to do. So she just had, like, for a young girl, and particularly of that era, a pretty outstanding strength.
The rings are hard. Like, that's upper body strength.
It is. It's really heavy on upper body, which is why the rings are a men's, like, that's the men's forte in most gymnastics. In 1896, a reporter saw her performance and wrote about it in the local Sacramento paper, and that gave Charmion her first bit of fame and opened a whole lot of doors for her to start performing in other venues around California, mostly in Sacramento and the Bay Area. And it was around that time that she took the stage name Lavevi Charmion.
Okay.
Lavevi.
Spell it again slower.
Lavevi. Lavivi. Laveve? Lavive?
Lavarve? Yeah. Don't ask me.
So she took on this name Charmion. And I can't remember. I think I read somewhere where it came from, but I don't recall what it was. So realizing that she could start making money and even a career out of performing and entertaining, Charmion set out to start a family gymnastics act in 1897.
Oh, cool. Like, she had a family?
No, it doesn't appear that was her. I think she was going to do, like, you know, sort of vaudeville and circus stuff. They, like, just make up.
Okay.
Like, we're a family.
It's a show, yeah.
So she sought out other gymnists to add to the act, and she began to coach them and train them herself at her own studio in Oak Park. However, this sort of fell apart because she decided to go solo. And I don't really know exactly what the series of events there was, but it seems like someone must have approached her and said, "Hey, I saw you. You look great on your own. Come be a part of our
do this
show."
instead.
I say that because it is in December of 1897, so she had wanted to start this gymnastic act this same year. So this is at the end of that year. She debuted as just Charmion, And she did so at a fairly famous theater in New York City called Coster and Biles.
Very cool. And she was headliner?
Well, not headliner, but she was one of the prominent acts.
Nice.
And like, again, she's from California. So someone brought her in the fold.
You don't just get a show. I don't know. I don't think you do. You go from California to New York.
Yeah, it makes more sense that she would have been like traveling around California, even just the West, before going to New York. And so to have her not only just go straight from being just in the Sacramento Bay Area to New York City in a pretty well-known established theater, it just implies that there was some kind of, either she joined a troupe or a show or somebody, an agent, whatever, got her into this. But there isn't a lot of information about who might have been that connection. So Charmion took her gymnastic skills and put it into a trapeze act. But trapeze acts were like really common at the time.
Okay.
Everybody had seen a trapeze act. And so that was like not going to cut it. She couldn't just be a trapeze artist. And she decided to then also incorporate something else.
All right.
So she started to also disrobe as she did her act.
Really?
Yeah.
Saucy.
A little saucy, right? As you might imagine, caused quite a stir.
Yes.
So both trapeze acts and stripping had been in existence for a while in the circuses and vaudeville areas and burlesque, right? But as you might imagine, this was new.
Yeah.
Doing the stripping while on a trapeze was new.
This would be how I would die. I am the clumsiest person in the world, and if I was trying to do that, it would be over.
When I get to the part of her actual act, yes.
Okay.
I would die. Specifically, the way she did her act, I would die. So at the time, she got a lot of attention immediately, like her first performance. This is a prominent newspaper at the time called the New York Dramatic Mirror, who reported on it. Quote, "A few steps brought her to the rope, which she was hoisted on the trapeze. She then attempted 1 or 2 tricks, but seemed to find her clothes a bother. So she began to unhook her waist. When she began to take it off, she exhibited all the shyness of a timid girl. Finally, the waist came off."
Ooh.
So at the same time that this reporter, I mean, that's very, you can just tell there's like a coquettishness, a flirtatiousness, not only in the way that she's doing it, but in the way that the reporter is describing it. It's not negative.
Yeah.
It seems like the reporter is like, hee hee hee.
A little hot under the collar.
So at the same time, the reporter was obviously like, liked the act and thought it was cool and fun. Social norms at the time required that the reporter also denounce what she was doing.
Required?
Yeah. So in the article, same article, he called it a, quote, vulgar exhibition, and, quote, "It was certainly to be deplored that any part of the public demands acts of this kind."
Okay.
So he had to acknowledge this, like, very Puritan idea.
Yeah.
At the same time as being like, but I really liked it.
That would be a hard piece to write.
Yeah, it really would be. So let me give you some context about why I say that he was required to do this. So 25 years before Charmion is debuting on this stage, there is something called the Committee for the Suppression of Vice. So vice being things...
Oh, things that are, drugs, sex, alcohol.
Yeah, smoking, drinking, sex, all of those things. Those are vices. So this Committee for the Suppression of Vice was established 25 years before Charmion's on stage. And it was the first federally appointed censor in the United States. That's what its job was, to censor.
Oof.
And the things that it was trying to do was stomp out, quote, obscenity. And obscenity included pictures, articles, books, or etc. that was deemed risque or obscene. And they believed that these kinds of things were, quote, the most virulent foe that Christian Americans would ever battle. It caused crime, debased the institution of marriage, and threatened to corrupt children, particularly young males, the future of the nation and race.
Oh, that's some big language. Whoa.
You know what it kind of reminds me of is what's going on right now. This like trans panic.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it's quote, the most virulent foe that Christian Americans would ever battle. It caused crime, debased the institution of marriage, and threatened to corrupt children.
Yep.
Yeah. Don't you think?
Yes.
Sounds very similar.
Very similar.
Which is how you know that conservative Christian America has been around just for fucking ever. So, as most things in America are, the rules over what is considered obscene at the time were pretty biased.
Okay.
So, vaudeville acts and things like that, the circus, burlesque, those were seen as appealing to lower class people.
So, therefore, acceptable?
No, more obscene.
More obscene. Okay.
Right? So, in contrast, things like ballet, where the dancers, you could see their entire figure through their clothes, that was considered acceptable because that's high art. Okay. And it was done, viewed by the rich. Mm-hmm. So it didn't matter if, a dancer's costume, some dancers, like some of the ballet dancers were like basically naked, and that was not obscene. But something like Charmion would be considered obscene. Even though, and I didn't point this out yet, when she disrobed, she doesn't get naked. Mm-hmm. She just goes down to a leotard, which is what all of the other acrobats start in.
Yeah, so...
Right, so she's not in any way...
It's just the act of her
but
taking off clothes.
It's the act of her taking off clothes considered obscene.
That's so stupid.
It's absolutely... it doesn't make any sense, right?
No,
and it's
it doesn't.
Obviously a double standard. And has bias against the people who would be attending stuff like this, which were lower class, immigrants, so on and so forth. So in order for people to attend the shows and therefore for the artists to be able to make money and the people who ran the shows to make money, the showrunners would have to in some way appeal to this conservative point of view. So they, quote, had to maintain a veneer of purity and respectability. And this is a quote from Bieki, I think I'm saying that right, Bieki Gills, who was the author of an article called Flying, Flirting, and Flexing, Charmion's Trapeze Act, Sexuality, and Physical Culture at the Turn of the Century. So Bieki is flat out like, this person, like the people who ran these acts had to play up that there was some kind of purity here and respectability. Okay. So they would also forbade, like a lot of the theaters and stuff would forbade smoking and drinking, and they would play up the, quote, educational value of these acts.
Okay, to like reach a weird ass standard.
Yeah, to placate these censors, basically. So Charmion was no exception. That was the thing that they would say is like, oh, it's an educational act. In addition to being entertaining, right? And that actually, I think, was, in her case, pretty fucking true. Because she didn't just get up on a trapeze and take her clothes off. What she did was that she would basically do infotainment. Throughout her whole act, she talked to the audience. And if they had questions, like she would ask them questions, they would ask her questions, she would answer them. And she was engaging with them directly and telling them about diet and exercise. She had just a wild exercise routine, by the way. She like proposed and recommended that every woman, first thing in the morning, that they exercise. Although she said like, lift 3 pounds, like 3-pound dumbbells or whatever, work your way up to 80. And I was like, girl,
whoa.
I am just now able to like do 15-pound dumbbells with my reps, and I'm fucking stoked about it because that feels like a big deal. And I'm like, 80.
That's a toddler in each arm.
I actually, at my gym, my trainer has 90-pound dumbbells that sit on a rack. And every single time I look at them, I'm like, who the hell could lift that? I mean, like I can't even imagine how you could lift that. And
yeah,
the actual like dumbbell itself is larger than a bowling ball. It's massive.
Yikes.
To be able to like just like curl that?
Yeah.
Come on now. I don't even think most bodybuild. I mean, you'd have to be a bodybuilder to be able to lift that.
You'd have to have some serious training behind you, yeah.
It's not even like, I don't even think Nick, who's a huge muscular dude, I don't think even he could do that.
He's benched like over 400.
Benching is different,
Benching is different than lifting. He's picked up a refrigerator.
I'm talking about curls.
He picked up a refrigerator and took it up the stairs.
Yes, he did. Like on his back.
No, he bear hugged it.
Oh.
And just picked it up.
Good Lord.
Yeah. He put a couch on his back and lifted
That's right. It was okay. So I'm just so off here. Yeah, but I still think like if he were to sit down and just pick up those dumbbells and just try to do bicep curls, no way.
That'd be rough.
One-armed? That's the other thing. They're one-armed. You can't do them with both arms.
Yeah.
In any case, it was also very clear from her presentations and interviews with reporters that she really believed that at the time, the dress requirements for women were absurd and counterproductive for a quote-unquote healthy body.
Oh, it's been threaded all throughout history with women's clothes just being so unrealistic.
And that was one of the central tenets and reasons that she disrobed. Like, that was the point. Mm-hmm. So what happens is that when she comes on stage, she's in full Victorian dress. So what a lady was supposed to wear at the time when they went out in public. And as she sits and swings on the trapeze, it becomes clear both to her and the audience that what she's wearing is impeding her ability to perform. Like, she starts slipping. Mm-hmm. She can't, like, hold on. She's going to fall off. This is what I mean about, like, I could not do this because I would actually fall.
Yeah.
So she starts taking off this attire one piece at a time. So I know we've all seen pictures of Victorian dress and, like, in movies and stuff. And I know we all know that there's corsets, but I actually looked up what it took to wear these things, like what they all had to wear. And girl, I was not prepared.
There's like layers and layers, isn't there?
Oh yeah, you want to hear the layers?
Sure.
Okay. This is a whole page of just what they had to wear. So the first layer was underwear. And underwear was 5 items.
Oh gosh. Sorry if I just shouted in your ears, y'all, by the way, but they turned the page to me and it is 2 pages. Okay.
Yeah, it's a page and a quarter of just what they wear.
That's why I exclaimed.
So 5 layers. First, they had to wear stockings that would be then held up with garters. Okay. Then they had to put their shoes on because if they didn't put their shoes on now, they weren't going to ever be able to get them on. Right?
Okay.
Like, can you imagine if you were like, I'm putting my undies on and now my shoes?
That would be weird.
So foreign. So early on, you put the shoes on. Then they put on their drawers, which were underwear. They were made of 2 flaps that overlapped and attached around the waist. So a flap in the front, a flap in the back.
Cute.
And then over that was what they called a decency skirt. And that was a narrow petticoat. So it's this very slim underskirt that would protect a woman's, quote, modesty should the wind lift up her skirt. Then over that was a chemise, which is like a long sleeveless undershirt. Mm-hmm. It usually went past the waist. So that's underwear. Now we're second layer. The second layer was everything that forms the silhouette. So the corset was first, and the corsets were made of whalebone or sometimes steel rods.
What?
Steel.
Holy shit.
Steel.
That's not fun.
Like, imagine our mic stands on our bodies.
No, thank you.
No thanks. So, I mean, these aren't even steel. They're just metal, but like just that like idea of that hard metal.
Yeah.
So the by the time that Charmion is performing, the corsets of that time were long and the boning or the steel actually extended over the hips.
Okay. Oh, I've seen those. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can't even imagine how you would sit down because it would poke into your thigh. Mm-hmm. So that's, again, on a trapeze in the air. Then over the corset is a crinoline, which is a flexible, lightweight hoop. Right, that's the big hoop.
Seen those.
And that's what keeps the bell of the skirt, right? And after that is a bustle. So the bustle is put around the waist, and it like sort of lays over the crinoline. And it's just like a piece of layered fabric in the back to make you look like you have a really big ass, I guess. I don't really know what the purpose of the bustle was other than that. Then the third layer is what they call the protective layer. So
the protective layer.
So the third layer was a camisole or some sort of corset cover that protected the outer garments from your sweat and oils. So they had to protect it because obviously you're going to be sweating.
Yeah.
Then after that was a petticoat, and the petticoat would protect the outer skirt from the crinoline. So like, because the crinoline, that hoop, like, could very well damage the skirt. It might poke through it and stuff like that. So you had to have a petticoat over it. And that also helped the outer skirt lay flat. So it looked really nice. And the fourth layer is the actual dress. So you have a bodice that you put on, and then that was really fitted. So then it would be tied to you. And then there was a skirt that was most of them were floor length. And some even had a train, and so the train could be worn down or bustled up in the back. It was more common to see it bustled up. And as if all that weren't enough, then came the accessories. And that was stuff like undersleeves that protected the hem of the sleeve against your sweat, ruffles at the bottom to keep it from getting dirty and ripping, a shawl or a cape to protect against the weather, gloves for practical reasons, but also for modesty.
Oh my gosh.
A hat or a bonnet. No woman ever left the house without one. A parasol, like an umbrella to protect from the sun. And then lastly, women carried a fan when it was warm or if they were attending a ball.
And then they locked her in a trunk and threw away the key.
So that's everything that this woman is wearing on a fucking trapeze.
She had to have modified it, because how could she possibly get out of, like, if she's tied up, like in the back for her skirt and like her bodice, how would you do that?
I mean, she obviously must not have done it as tight. Like, I think it was probably just loose. But I'm actually in a minute going to show you a video of her trapeze act. I don't think it's the entire thing, though, based on the way that everybody described it in the news articles.
Okay.
Like, I read actual newspaper articles from the time that she was performing. And the way that they described it, it was like she was up there for quite a while. So needless to say, she had obviously a lot of garments that she could take off in the act, which is why it was so long, right? Like, she would start with taking off her shoes, and then there would be stockings and things like that. Like, she could just be on there forever.
Yeah.
And she would also then show them the struggle of all of the clothing.
That's pretty brilliant.
You know?
Yeah.
And for men in the audience who probably were not aware of what it took for women to get dressed, this would have been actually educational.
Yes. Actually, too, just like thinking about it now and the time and the era and the stigma of how controversial that probably was for some people, because women are supposed to be a mystery. You're supposed to be this presence, you know.
You're a package.
You're a package. And to see all the layers and like maybe light that male guilt, you know, like, oh shit, I didn't know she got to put all that shit on.
Yeah, I definitely think there was like
but that pissed people off.
Oh, it did. For sure. And you mentioned the like mystery. In one interview I read, Charmion actually talked about that the fact that at the end she's wearing a leotard still leaves the mystery, and that was intentional. That and actually sometimes she just goes down to the underwear part, not even an actual leotard. So like, you know, at the beginning I said the underwear was like stockings and a garter and like a chemise. Like she would have all of that stuff still on. But most of the time it said that she would disrobe and then underneath would be a leotard. Which I actually found out that the title of leotard actually came from a guy named like something Leotard in France, who was like the guy who created the trapeze.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Fun fact. Just a little rabbit hole I fell down. So in shedding that dress, she accomplished a few things, right? Layer by layer, she was able to show how absurd the attire was, and she was able to show women what freedom and independence could look like. Because in articles, like whenever people would interview her in the newspapers before her act, she would talk about how women should not be wearing this stuff. It's impractical, and it's dangerous. And so to be able to do that and show like this is what it's like to move your body freely at the end was radical.
Yeah, big time.
And obviously could really be controversial and inspirational.
Yes, which is also problematic.
That is very problematic. Charmion was a very vocal advocate for freer movement for women. So she was really against long skirts and vocally opposed to corsets. And that was obviously a pretty bold statement to make. But oddly enough, it was not an unheard of statement. At the time, the burgeoning women's movement was also really advocating for this change in women's attire. And that was, as we've talked about before, really catapulted into the spotlight through bicycles.
Oh, yeah.
If we remember Annie Londonderry,
yes,
she was the cyclist who cycled around the world, although that's debatable because we know she took some boats and some rides from people. But she had those bicycle pants, and we talked about like bicycles being a really big part of the independence of women at the time. And so she's not the only one talking about this by any means, but she's really helping to like give credence to that movement and that idea of freer, being able to fucking move your body.
Yeah.
Without all of this constriction.
Weight, yeah.
And, you know, she was actually really great at building her brand. That's what we would call it now.
Yeah.
But I would say that she was just really good at cultivating her image and the narrative that she wanted, which is why I think that's another reason why you can't find a lot of information about her personal life or family life or things like that, is because she didn't want you to know it. So
I like that though. Create your own path, your own story.
So we talked about her name being Charmion, and you mentioned that it was French, but that's like, she just fucking made that up. And there was a reason for that, because the French were known for their, quote, liberal values.
Oh, okay.
And for pushing the boundaries through art. And that meant that she could like have more freedom around those obscenity laws. And she actually was so well known and talked about on stage being French.
Yeah.
Even though she's from Sacramento.
Oh, whoa. Okay. That's really making up a story.
Oh, no, yeah. She legitimately would be on stage like, I was born in France. I was brought to America in such and such time. Like, she just fucking lied. Straight up lied. And the newspaper started calling her the Parisian sensation.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
So what I thought was really funny is I found an old article in, like, I think it's the Sacramento Bee. And it said, quote, this is what the article said, quote, "The Bee will take this opportunity to put the Los Angeles writer," so it's a response to an LA writer calling her the Parisian sensation.
Okay.
"The Bee will take this opportunity to put the Los Angeles writer wise on the score of geography and nativity. The fair Charmion is not French. She is a Sacramento County girl whose maiden name was Cooper. She learned how to, quote, skin the cat and do other wonderful things upon a cheap sort of trapeze, probably an old piece of rope and a broomstick for a crossbar, suspended from the rafters of her father's barn at Oak Park."
Oh my gosh.
Like, it kind of feels shady.
That feels really shady. Like, that's digging deep.
They're like, not only is she not French, but she's just like a
pumpkin.
A little country pumpkin. Yes. Rude. So in 1898, Charmion actually had the opportunity to start traveling to Europe. And she won over crowds all over Paris and London. A London paper called her clever and boasted that she, quote, "can introduce on the trapeze contortions which few can exhibit on the floor." But of course, in England, they had some of those similar issues. And the reporter also noted that it was improper. There was impropriety. But
it's so weird.
Yeah.
It just sounds like such a badly written article.
Yeah, so she can't get praise without also being shamed.
Yes.
Sounds familiar.
Right.
I mean, how often did that happen to fucking Britney Spears?
Yep.
It's like, how talented and wonderful is this girl? But look how gross it is. She shows her stomach all the time.
But we still want to see it.
But
And
I
we
wanna
still put
see
the
it.
posters up on the wall and put her on a bus and a billboard. But how dare she?
How dare she? So most of the time, she's received very well by the audiences that are seeing her, and also by like newspapers and stuff as she's arriving. Like, she always gets a little bit of press before her act, and then often they'll do an interview with her, and then there's usually a review afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And so she gets pretty good reviews. She gets pretty good reception, except not in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
One particular performance did not go well. The audience was not very receptive, and the reviews were not good.
Okay. Like scathing?
Yeah, they called it, quote, revoltingly disgusting, coarse, and disagreeable.
Scathing.
Revoltingly disgusting?
Like, come on.
That's so shitty.
That is really shitty.
But Charmion was actually pretty successful, despite some of the times that she got negative press.
I mean, it's going to happen. It's going to happen either way.
Yeah. She was actually one of the highest earning female performers in vaudeville at the time. She averaged more than $200 a week.
That's pretty tidy.
This is in the early 1900s.
That's very good.
One of the ways in which she was able to drum up a fan base was through the photographic image. She had photos taken of her in various poses that showed off her very, very remarkable body. And then she had those photos distributed in leaflets ahead of her arrival,
Good press.
Yeah, she would pass out like pictures of herself. She also sold buttons with her image on it, which is like, that's pretty advanced.
Yeah.
And her image became like very recognizable. As soon as somebody saw it, they're like, oh, that's Charmion. So at the same time that her star is rising, so is the technology of filmmaking. So it was still pretty rudimentary. We talked about it a little bit when I did Alice Guy Blanchet.
Mm-hmm.
The moving image was starting to become more popular. And one of the pioneers in that early film movement was Thomas Edison. And he specialized in making short films of people that were just doing things. And he often featured vaudeville performers doing their act on film. So in 1901, Edison filmed Charmion doing her trapeze act. So I'm going to show it to you. It's a silent film, obviously. There's no sound.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to have you watch it and narrate it to the audience so that they kind of understand what's going on.
Okay. Copyright 1901. Jeesh.
Yeah, it's actually before that, there's like a warning that's like,
yeah,
don't copy it.
Okay, she's sitting on the trapeze, and this is full dress. Oh, look at her smile.
There she is, taking off her jacket.
Yeah, she's got her jacket off. She's starting with the hat. This seems like a little oh, she's flipping now. She's totally, completely flipping. In the skirt.
But then you can see that the skirt gets in the way.
Yes. She almost got stuck. Now she's standing on the trapeze, taking off the full skirt, just showing like, hey, I bet she's going to do another trick after this and say like, look how much better I can move. After this corset is gone, of course. Oh, she threw it to the people in the balcony. That is hilarious. Look at how animated these
so
people
fast.
on the left are just who are watching her are just going bonkers.
I think she just threw her.
Yeah, she's throwing her garter, her shoes, and they're trying to catch it. Did they play music while she did this or anything? Or was it just her talking, you said mostly?
Well, in her real act, oh my Lord.
Oh, she's hanging from upside down by her feet. And
she
removed her skirt that was underneath her full dress.
But now look at everything she can do.
And now she's doing full-on tricks. Whoa. She is flexible.
Yeah, and she's like hanging sometimes by just like
her ankles.
Yeah, her ankles. And she's just flipping around that bar like it's nothing.
Yeah. You can totally
and
see
then
her
look at her
upper
lift
body
her
strength.
whole
Yeah.
body.
She lifted herself completely off of the bar just by pulling up.
By just hanging onto the ropes and pulling
and
her
her
body
stomach
up.
and her legs were out. So that's complete core strength right there.
Yeah.
That is wild. And it seemed like it was sped up a little bit. It was going like really fast.
Well, if you notice that like all of those early films are like that.
They go a little quicker.
And I'm not really, I don't remember. I think I've read about why that was. I can't really remember. It has something to do with like the way in which it's filmed. I don't know. Anyway, it looks like it's sped up like on fast forward.
When she was upside down by her ankles and then just went floop and like pulled her skirt off from upside down. Like what if you got stuck? Like your elbows got stuck.
I know. This is what I was saying earlier. Like her act is dangerous.
Very.
So dangerous. So you saw those two men in the film, right?
Yes. Are those actors or okay?
So here's something really interesting I found about this. So, you know, it could just be her being filmed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like normally when Edison filmed other vaudeville acts, it was just filming the act. So like if it was like two trapeze artists who did the flying stuff and they caught each other,
it would just
be them. But in the case of Charmion, there had to be an audience.
Why?
So it would be scandalous if there wasn't somebody there to sort of show the audience watching the film that it's okay if you like it.
Because like if you're watching it just her by herself, it's basically porn or something?
Yeah, and you have to act disgusted by it.
Okay.
The social mores of the time would be that you had to be scandalized by watching this. But if there were these two men who were enjoying it and having fun...
And she's smiling and...
Yeah, then it's acceptable. But again, it doesn't matter what she's doing.
Oh, God.
The male gaze is what is important here.
What's important.
Yes. So they have to be enthusiastically enjoying it in order to let the audience who's watching the film know that they're allowed to enjoy it. Mm-hmm. So fucked up.
Yep.
So we're going to do something a little bit unusual for our show because we're going to really go in on talking about her body.
Okay.
Because I think it's really important for the context of the person we're talking about to really be able to describe what she looked like because she really was unusual for the time. So I'm going to pull up a couple photos of her and I'd like you to, these were photos that she also distributed. So I'd like you to take a look at some of these and describe them.
Her arms are amazing. She's very, very muscular. She looks so strong.
Yeah.
And yeah, her weight, you can see like she's wearing this leotard with like some lace decoration, like flowers on the front. This amazing hat with feathers, which is gorgeous. Massive hat with feathers.
It's like the same size as her body.
Yes, it's huge. And she's flexing her bicep. And you can just see like through her leotard, you can see her abs.
Yeah.
She's very, very like, she's got that almost triangle shape where you're just like so core, like solid in your core where it's all just muscle. And her arms are just built.
Yeah, it's very rare for women to look like that. So there's another tab at the top to the right of that one. Go ahead and click on that one. It should be two pictures of her.
So this one is a picture of her back. She's ripped. Yeah. There's one where she's doing like the very traditional stance of like, you know, thighs together and both flexing kind of in a T where you can like really like bodybuilders do this.
Yes,
to like
bodybuilders
show
do
off
this.
all of their, you know, rippling backs. She literally has a rippled back.
Yeah, it is incredible.
She's very short from the shoulders to the base of her spine. I bet she was just like a little ball of muscle.
Yeah, she very much looks like, you know, when we look at gymnasts.
Yeah, very much like a gymnast body.
Yeah, they're very like V-shaped, right? They have really wide shoulders and muscles, but they often don't look quite that muscular.
No, she did some serious weightlifting.
Yeah, like
tell.
this is like, these are not just muscles. These are like bulging muscles.
Yes. Where she was doing reps.
Yeah.
Yes.
And honestly, it's quite unusual for women's bodies to even look like this.
Yes.
Like it's not common.
Mm-mm.
And is pretty hard to achieve. So that she looked like that naturally at a time when we didn't know very much about how to build muscle and like protein intake and shit like that.
Or even like certain workouts that will create that kind of look that you would like. There's people who would want to look like this.
Oh, I want to.
Yes.
I'm dying to look like this. That's why I was like, I've worked my way up to 15-pound dumbbells. Fuck my life. Like, this
those
person,
are definitely 80-pound dumbbell arms.
Yes. And also I wanted to point out that on the, we're going to post this photo specifically on our Instagram. So if you want to see what we're seeing, definitely head on over there because it's really, I think, important to understanding this conversation. On the left, she's got this sort of ruffle bottom, like bloomer situation. And she has this like gauzy wrap around her. And you can tell that on the left side, it goes up to her chest, right? So it's covering her boobs. On the right, however,
she's not wearing anything.
It's all the way down to her waist. So there's nothing covering her chest. And she's being photographed from the back. So it's not showing anything. But that is fucking scandalous.
That is, yeah. And the fact that she's at the time passing these out, I honestly, this is a fucking amazing. Like, what a way to create a buzz about yourself.
So the reason why I wanted to really sort of zoom in on her body is to talk about what it would have meant at the time to look like this. So Charmion is living in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. And so it is around this time that the new woman, capital N, capital W, it's a concept, has become like part of the zeitgeist. So the new woman was a woman who had more autonomy, the ability to divorce their husbands. They were now allowed to own property, obviously still couldn't vote, but there were people trying to get, women who were pushing for the right to vote. And it was like a movement, right? And it really meant a lot. Like, it was the first time in modern history that women could be like independent. They could like have jobs, work and have careers. It was brand new. And so that's why it's called the New Woman. But that concept and that movement was very much centered around upper to middle class white women. So you had to have access to means, to education, to all of those things in order to be able to do this, to be quote unquote a new woman. It really left behind women of color and immigrants. And that has been talked about and written about at length by people at that time, which is always so interesting to me because, like, I grew up as an English student, right? So in college, I read so much about, like, in American Lit, about this concept and like what it meant and who was writing it. But I did not read anything about how other people who were not included in the group that is represented in the New Woman, how they felt about it. And I had the wrong assumption that there just wasn't anybody.
In a perfect world. Yeah.
Well, like, I just didn't think anybody like that was a woman of color, an immigrant or whoever, poor. I didn't think that they were writing about it, but they were. And I mean, that's just a really naive and dumb. I obviously don't think that now. I understand now that the reason why we didn't hear those voices is not because they didn't exist, but because they were intentionally left out.
Yeah, they were intentionally left out and also erased.
Yes, very much so. So I think that, like, that's the whole reason we do the show, right? Is to highlight those kind of missing voices. So at the same time that this is happening, the New Woman, that concept was really dangerous and scary because it was a direct challenge to men.
And how they had lived their lives with women
as
up to this point.
Inferior, right? And so this caused in the United States and in Europe a crisis of masculinity. And one of the answers to this crisis was to create the concept of what the perfect man was. And they really went in on masculinity.
Okay.
So one of the perfect examples of what the perfect man was, he was actually nicknamed this, was another vaudeville performer, a man named Eugen Sandow. And I had heard his name before, and as soon as I saw a picture of him, I was like, oh yeah, I've seen this guy before.
Okay.
So this is, at the time, what the ideal man is. This is what he was considered.
Okay. Very, very muscular. 6-pack, very big shoulders, big legs. He looks very, very like
strong,
thick.
Yeah, he's thick. He's
really
strong.
thick.
He's in command. So now comes this idea that the perfect man, in answer to this like idea of the waning masculinity, is that you have to really lean in. You have to become this bulky, built, muscly, strong white man. Mm-hmm. And that was definitely a very specific, it had to be white. You had to be white to be able to do this, because it was supposed to be like an answer to this crisis of masculinity that was being challenged by these new women, but also by the rise of like Black and immigrant men who were by this point allowed to vote.
Ooh, so the walls are coming in.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it really is eugenics. And I thought this was really interesting. I was talking to my wife about this, and then she was like, is Eugen his name because of eugenics? Like, is that? And I was like, I don't know. So I did a little digging, and his given name was Frederick. He chose this as his stage name.
Interesting.
And he chose his stage name a year after the eugenics concept was popularized. So do I think that? Maybe. I have zero proof. I looked and looked and looked. I read a lot. I fell down another rabbit hole. Could not discover whether or not he created the name to specifically reference eugenics.
Based on, yeah.
But I wouldn't be surprised.
Interesting.
So he was the perfect man. And so in contrast, women were supposed to be really delicate and beautiful and soft and all of these like very hyper feminine. So he's hyper masculine. They need to be hyper feminine. And again, it's supposed to contrast the other kind of women, particularly like lower class and women of color who had jobs that often required like hard labor, and therefore they would be
very strong,
larger and more muscular and things like that. And so that was a problem, right? Like they weren't real feminine. They weren't really women. And so it's all very fucking dumb.
It's such a freaking weird ass spiral.
So Charmion, interestingly enough, is both a challenge to that masculinity and at the same time was often called in newspapers and things like that the female Sandow. And also was nicknamed the perfect woman.
Okay. Oh, wow.
Right? Because he's the perfect man.
Yeah.
And so she would be called the perfect woman.
That is interesting.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like she very much embodies this anxiety about masculinity because of the way she looks. Mm-hmm. She is very masculine.
And intimidating.
Yeah.
Also in her photos, though, very daring. I mean, really pushing that boundary.
But if you noticed, we both commented on her hat, right? Mm-hmm. So she's always dressed very feminine. And I was reading about other strong women at the time, and they often were photographed in very feminine poses to really play up that femininity, to fit in with that, like, to be able to not challenge this masculinity and not make men feel like they were inferior. God forbid, right? And I was trying to find other photos of Charmion to see if that ever was the case for her, and I found this one.
That's very feminine.
Yeah.
Very delicate looking. She looks like a ballerina, like in the outfit, white leotard. Looks kind of like a corset, maybe.
Yeah, it looks a little more fitted.
Lots of flowers. Her hair's done.
Yeah, it's very flowery.
Her toes like really delicately pointed. One arm's behind her back.
Yeah, nothing that even comes close to those poses where she's showing off her muscles. In this, she looks very soft. And so that to me is very indicative of the idea that they wanted to make sure that they could do both at once, right? She had to be both.
Do you think a photo like that, she would use more of like a poster going into her show rather than the other ones?
Perhaps, or the thing that they sent to newspapers to in advance of her arrival so that it wouldn't cause too much of a stir. They wouldn't, and then at the actual shows, those photos of her flexing were the ones that she would sell on buttons and things like that. Nice. So, and people loved those. And especially after seeing her. And as you mentioned, when she was disrobing on the trapeze, she's smiling the whole time. Like she had to be very approachable, feminine, non-threatening.
Like, I'm already doing this thing that I'm not supposed to be doing. I'm already looking a certain way that I'm not supposed to be looking. So let me try to placate. Like, you know?
I can't imagine how difficult that would have been.
I think it would hurt a little bit.
So I actually wrote this thing that I thought, because I was thinking about this and what a contradiction just that she is, like her existence at this time. And I wrote that she is literally embodying in her body both the ideal and the anxieties of a nation. It's a lot to have.
That's a lot of weight
to
carry.
Body. So Charmion continued to perform in theaters and circuses around the country, and she didn't always have a good time. As we mentioned, her act looked pretty dangerous.
Yes.
So there was a time when she was performing in Budapest that the rope that held up her crossbar, it twisted and it moved the bar out of place and she fell.
Oh, geez.
And almost landed on her head, but she managed to twist. So I think that her gymnastics background really helped her out there, and she was able to land on her feet. But because of the fall, it actually caused her to break bones in three places in the bones in her feet.
Oh.
Another time she was involved in another accident where the entire trapeze structure fell to the ground. She was swinging on the trapeze back and forth, building up really big momentum. So back towards the curtain, out towards the audience. So she was like over the audience and they're like, whoa, right? Mm-hmm. And at that moment, the steel brace of the framework that held up the trapeze slipped and the entire structure crashed to the ground. And somehow she managed to escape that. But if she had not, that structure by itself was 500 pounds. And
she would have died.
It would have just landed right on her. She didn't get injured from that, thank God. But she was obviously very startled. I found it really fascinating, though. Like, they closed the curtain immediately because they didn't want the audience to see what was going on. And then she came back out and continued her performance just on the ground.
Oh my gosh. I would be like, I'm going home. I don't get paid enough for this. I almost died.
I would have been like, I don't think I can do this today. Sorry, everybody.
Yes.
But I think maybe, if that's the only way you make money, I guess you're going to finish it.
You're going to have to.
But it's like, I don't know that my life would be worth, my life is worth more than that $200 or whatever. So I mentioned that we don't know a whole lot about her personal life. Mm-hmm. I do know that she was married to a man named Harry Delaney, and she'd been with him for many years. Like, I think prior to that disrobing video. And he was her manager and her trainer and her husband.
Yeah, we've seen that a couple times.
We have. And they were together until he died in 1905. And then she remarried in 1912 to another performer who was a strong man named William Villet. So her name then became La Vie Villet, her real name. Charmion retired from performing around 1910. That's like the last known performance. Not much is known about what happened after that. We know that she lived for a time in New York and that eventually she made her way back to California, and she died in 1949 in Santa Ana. So I want to leave you with a quote from a newspaper article about Charmion from 1909, which is the year before she retired. Charmion, the vivacious, the lithe, the athletic, the graceful and beautiful Charmion, the world's most perfect woman, is not a freak. She is not gross. She is a type of remarkably developed womanhood, the likes of which has probably not been seen since the Roman days. Her act incorporates a running flare of witticism. Her costumes are brilliant and serve to set off her wonderfully developed self. Charmion, unless all signs fail, will be the week's sensation here.
Very nice.
And that's the story of Charmion the Strong Woman.
That's awesome. The quote, though, she's not a freak. Like, hinting that there are, it's just
well, and
it's not my favorite.
Also hinting that that's maybe a thing people have said about her because of her body.
Yes.
Because it's unlike what women are one, supposed to look like and generally do look like, right? Soft and smooth and pretty or whatever. And then she's got this like bulging muscle everywhere on her top half. And then probably her legs as well. But we really see it in her upper body, which is, again, not a thing that most women then or now are able to accomplish with their bodies.
Oh, yeah.
You have to have like a natural, there was something obviously very natural in her body that allowed her to build muscle in that way. But that's her story. The person who embodied both the nation's ideal and anxieties.
Cool story. She was super interesting.
Yeah, I thought so too. I also thought the time period was kind of interesting. This sort of crisis of identity that white people in general, I think, were going through and turning to ugly ideas like eugenics in order to make their way through it. Fucking weird.
Weird.
So I have a few cool sources. The first is one I mentioned, The Flying, Flirting, and Flexing, Charmion's Trapeze Act, Sexuality, and Physical Culture at the Turn of the 20th Century by B.L.K. Gills. This strong woman became a champion for body positivity by C.S. Vole on yesterday.com. The video is the Trapeze Disrobing Act, which is on the Library of Congress's YouTube channel. There is a profile of Charmion on the performingartsarchive.com. And then I got another academic article that was actually a chapter from a book called The Many Worlds of Circus. And the chapter that I used is called Strong Women and Cross-Dressed Men, Representations of Gender by Performers During the Golden Age of the American Circus by Marcy Wynn Murray. And believe me, I really wish I could have talked about the cross-dressing men of this time.
Yeah.
And there's one in particular that I really wish I could find information on, but there's nothing.
Oh, no.
And that person I really wish I could do, but I cannot find any information.
Oh, gosh.
It's like a paragraph here and there. That's it.
I hate when that happens.
Because I would be like, we're going to do a part 2 and we're going to talk about this cross-dressing performer. And then I used Dressing During the Victorian Era by Donna Klein for a blog, ? Called Recollections. And then I used Wikipedia for just references like Eugen Sandow and things like that.
That was awesome. I really enjoyed that a lot.
Good, I'm glad. And you guys are going to have a great time looking at those photos.
They're amazing.
It's just incredible. Her body is so
beautiful.
incredible. It's like anytime somebody can like put in that kind of focus on their physique in that way, like I'm just fucking impressed by it.
Yeah, the muscle, the tapering of the muscle and everything was just perfect.
Yeah. And I actually am on a new journey where I'm going to be starting testosterone soon. And one of my like hopes and dreams is that it helps me grow muscles a little easier because it's just so much harder. And I was thinking, like, when I looked at her, you know, all of these things that I've been looking up about, like, what are the side effects of testosterone and what are the things I can expect or maybe not expect, and then they'll show up. And a lot of them talk about, like, you know, you might have a stronger jawline and facial hair and things like that. And I was like looking at her photos and I was like, I wonder if she had a natural higher amount of testosterone just based on her face shape. I was like, her face shape and her muscle building. Again, this is just conjecture. I have no idea. But it did remind me of that. And particularly at this moment when we're debating about who's allowed to be an athlete. Mm-hmm. And they're like a lot of these organizations have based their inclusion in women's sports based on testosterone levels and estrogen levels. So that's like, it's just been on my mind. And when I was reading her story and looking at her photos, it just piqued my curiosity.
Yeah.
That she might have just had a naturally elevated testosterone level for a woman. That's all.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Wish you could, yeah.
I wish I knew.
Yeah.
I wish we'd like find out.
Like, how can I do this? How can I accomplish this?
Yeah. Because it's also proof that I think that there have been people since the dawn of time who don't fit into a box.
Absolutely. 100%.
Who are not binary. Like, when I look at Charmion, she seems like a non-binary person, right?
She looks really fluid.
She has like the encapsulations of masculinity and femininity in one body, and maybe not even by choice. Like, it at the time, it was so expected and required of women to dress a certain way and behave a certain way. So it's like, it's always hard to tell what part of her femininity that she's putting in these pictures, right? What part is hers and what part is costume.
Yeah.
And boy, do I know what it's like to have femininity be a costume that you wear. Because I was really good at it.
Yeah, you were.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I really intentionally was good at it. And to let go of that, like, forced costuming of oneself, oof, it's hard. It's really, really hard. And to do that in 1909 or whatever.
Oh, yeah. Hell yeah.
Holy shit. Impressive.
Very.
Well, everyone, thank you for listening. We are so grateful that you're here on this ride with us. If you want to support our show, don't forget that we are on Patreon. And for as little as $3 a month, you can help us make more content. We do have a new episode on Patreon coming up at the end of March, so really soon here. And it is an interview with a brilliant listener that we have who is working in the Texas prison systems to create a better environment for inmates.
It's fascinating.
It's so good.
She's fascinating.
She is like, she's incredible, like a god. We talk about all the time, like, we want women to be flawed, and I'm sure she's very flawed, but I was like, stars in my eyes.
Me too.
You're incredible. So look for that interview soon. Please join our Patreon so that you can listen to it, because it's worth it. Even if it's just for 1 month, I guarantee you're going to want to listen to that interview. She's so great.
We'd also like to thank Lucas McIntyre, our editor, for our wonderful editing jobs.
Yeah, especially today. We had a little oopsies in the middle of recording, and so hopefully he's able to match our levels. Yikes.
We also like to thank Jennifer Finch of L7 for our wonderful opening music.
Yes. And thank you all for listening, and we hope you continue on this ride with us.
Awesome. Till next time, folks.
Goodbye.